Brent.
I'm Kerry.
We are the Stagmer brothers, a Baltimore knife and sword. We're going to be building some of your favorite weapons, and some weapons that you've never seen before.
This is Man-at-Arms, REFORGED. For our fairy tale build, we've decided to build Erza's sword, and also her armor.
This is a piece of 1075 steel, and I have to forge the blade out of that. I have to do so very quickly and hand it off to Matt.
To begin the forging on Erza's sword, Ilya's first got to break down that big round stock into a nice square bar. He moves to the nacelle to start this process. Erza's original sword, but the only drawings we really have to work from are pretty cartoony, and we have to make something real, sharp, and lethal. So Ilya's doing his best to compromise between the kind of basic cartoon drawings and what a real sword would be. I think we're gonna produce something that you guys all really love. Now that the blade is roughly to shape, Ilya cools off the tip, flips it around, and forges out the tang. He already cut off the handle section that he was using just to hold it, and now he's drawing it out underneath the flat dies on the power hammer. This will then prep him to be able to start forging in those bevels by hand.
Right now, I'm completely done with working in the power hammer, and I proceed to hand forging. At this point, my blade is rectangular. That's the cross section. And I have to bring it back into what is known as diamond grind or full grind. So this is the edge, this is the center. The advantage of a diamond cross section is that I have these two ridges that set up my rigidity on the blade. And we have a gradual taper to the edge that gives me the smallest amount of angle, which means the greatest amount of sharpness, as well as the blade not being too thin.
After hand beveling, Matt and Ilya use a flatter to give a more consistent surface and straighten the blade.
The flatter trues up the bevel and allows to clean up some of the forging and prepare it for the grinding.
Ilya heat cycles the blade. This will allow us to keep it a little bit straighter as we come out of hardening.
I heat cycle by placing the sword in the forge, getting it up to approximately 1500 degrees, 1560, waiting about 1 or 2 minutes, and then quenching it in the oil. Straight up to the oil quench, I go back in the forge and heat it up to about 1450 to 1500 degrees and quench it again. After that, I go back in the forge and let the blade heat up and cool off slowly.
Alright, we got our blade back from forging. This blade is pretty straightforward. It's gonna have a diamond ground cross section with a very short fuller ground in. What I gotta do first is just do a little bit of profile grinding, take out a few of these little bumps that are left on the edge, refine the tip a little bit, and then I'll be able to go to edge grinding and laying in that fuller on the 2-inch wheel. Alright, now that we got the blade profiled, meaning the outside is exactly how it's supposed to be, we got nice parallel edges, I'm gonna begin starting to lay in those edge bevels. Ilya did a lot of this by forging, but I'm gonna go ahead and pull it all the way into that middle cross section that we're looking for. Alright, I've gone ahead and I've rough ground one side of this blade. For the sake of time, I'm gonna go ahead and lay in the fuller on the side that I do have ground already. I'm gonna go horizontal on the 2-inch wheel to create the fuller. It's a really short fuller, only about 8 inches long.
We put fullers in blades almost every way possible, but when it's a small piece like this, Matt can just jump right in on the grinder, true it up, and grind it to form.
Now that I have the blade fully ground, it's time for heat treating.
I have no flaws except one. I lie too much. Now, I lied here. This is not actually 1075. I laminated 1075 high carbon steel with 1095 high carbon steel and a little bit of W2 steel. So all of those steels involved are good blade steels. They're good for kitchen knives. They're good for making precision tools, so on and so forth. Now, I'm going to heat treat this blade. Again, high carbon steels are very finicky about temperature. If you overheat any part of the blade, you grow your grains and you destroy the piece.
Ilya carefully removes the blade from the fire, moves straight to the oil, quenches it nice and evenly. He then moves to the vise to get any warping out. He only has a few seconds to do this straightening. This is a very stressful part. Your heart's racing, your mind's going crazy. You have to stay focused. Now that he's happy with the straightness, Ilya clamps the blade vertically into the vise and lets it sit and cool down slowly. No cracks, no stress fractures. At this point, the bladesmith can admire his work.
Now that the blade is quenched, making the steel hard, you can hear the way the blade vibrates in response to a file. The file feels like it's scathing on glass, which means that the blade is at maximum hardness right now.
We have to temper that hardness back. So we place the blade into some hot oil at about 450 degrees for an hour or so, and then remove it, and then it's ready to be ground.
I will pull it out, check for the warps, as the tempering process is absolutely the last stage when any warps can be fixed. If there are any warps, I'll go to the vise and straighten it out. Very hot. Right, Erza's sword is basically straight. And I can't wait for Matt to finish grinding it.
All right, we have our blade heat treated and tempered now. Looks pretty good. Ilya was able to keep it nice and straight. So from here, I'm gonna start polishing. I'm gonna start at 80 grit. It's really gonna allow me to get all this black deep scale off. Then I'll move from a 120, 220, and so on.
I'm about to make the patterns for Erza's armor. The key part about making patterns is having all the measurements right. Our cosplayer is going to be somewhat smaller than I am, which is a good thing. Whenever you're making patterns for armor, you want the pattern to be larger than the final product. That accounts for the rag, the excess you cut off on the sides, as well as the rolled edges when you roll the edge around itself so it doesn't hurt the wearer, as well as all the clothing that goes underneath. It allows for more material to play with. If you cut out the piece too small, you have to throw it out completely. There's a saying in Russia, measure 7 times and cut only once. So I've begun raising the breastplate for Erza. Raising is a process, unlike dishing, that does not stretch out the material. If you look, I have a rounded stake, and I place my material on the center right here, and work into the empty space, bending the material around the stake, all around. The material that's bent is being also pushed in on the sides together, so the cuirass actually becomes thicker towards the edge without losing any of the thickness of the center. This is the optimal way of making armor. Cuirasses, helmets, elbow cops, and other pieces where thickness is crucial.
After cutting a small piece of round stock on the saw, I place it into the forge, heat it up, move to the screw press, and squish it to create a little bit more of an oval shape that I'm looking for the coin block, which is the central portion of the guard. To create the wings of the guard for this sword, we're going to use the plasma cutter. There's going to be a base shape that's going to have some feathers sculpted into it that's then going to get overlays to create the look that we're searching for. To create the pommel, which is the counterbalance for this sword, I'm going to start from a large piece of bar stock. I'm going to heat it up in the forge, then I'm going to move to the screw press with some dishing dies to give it some form. Now that we have all the hilt parts cut and deburred, I can start to sculpt on the wing section of the guard. First I'm going to draw with the Sharpie my lines, then I'm going to move to a really narrow contact wheel on the sander and form those lines. After grinding, I dry fit the overlay to make sure everything looks right. Looks spot on to me, ready to move on.
Now that we have the parts cut and cleaned up for Erza's sword guard wings, it's time to go ahead and start welding the overlays on. First thing is to tack weld them into place.
John's gonna use a MIG welder to lay a bead around the profile. Then he'll move to the sanders and clean it up and make it look like one uniform piece.
So, as you can see, I gave a lot of shape to the cuirass, trimmed off a lot of the excess. Now you see I had the neck cut in, and it's time for planishing. Planishing is done basically on the same stake that you use for the raising. However, this time, instead of hitting into empty space, you're hitting exactly on the material that is located on the stake. Thereby, you're removing some of the dings which are produced in the raising process. The surface is gradually getting smoother. I use the chalk to indicate my low and high areas. So because the chalk stick is straight, when I pass it over an area, it outlines a ding. So this is a recess, and these are the high points. So this is the English wheel. As you have seen in the Hylian shield episode, it works by clamping your piece between these two wheels, and as you roll it, it planishes out all the dings and gets an even smoother finish than you can achieve via hammer. Now I can also use it to refine my planes that meet around here. I already indicated some of my guiding lines with chalk on the breastplate, and all I'm doing is following those lines to have this crisp double hourglass shape. Back in the day, planishing would have been done by apprentices. This tool removes any need for such.
Using a cutter the same thickness as the tang, John cuts the guard and the pommel to match the blade width.
Now that we have all the parts prepared for the Erza sword guard, I'm going to start assembling them by tack welding the wings to the center coil block section.
Matt now blends out these welds to make this one seamless piece. Sam now uses the heat of the torch to create the blue coloration on the guard. Matt now uses the Scotch-Brite to highlight this guard, leaving the dark background and the bright foreground.
Already rough started the fluid on the tasseys for Erza's armor. Now I'm going to use my fluting stake and refine it with one of my Armourer's hammers. The Armourer's hammer pushes the flute that is bulged out on this side back in on itself, creating a sharp ridge and a step effect. This is the tassay refined, and this one has only the rough fluting done to it. As you can see, the flute here has more of a step-like effect, and this one looks more like a ridge rather than a simple flute on this one.
Matt's going to be using a blackening compound for the fuller.
So I'm going to use some black oxidizing liquid. I'm going to use a Scotch-Brite pad and slowly apply it until I get the desired color. Then I'll go back on our Scotch-Brite wheel over there and touch up the edges if anything gets spilled over. Then we got to do the pommel, and we'll do the same thing. It's now time to start sanding on our wood handle. In the anime, it's very cylindrical. Cylindrical handles don't make good handles for sharp swords because you can't keep your edge orientation correct, and it becomes dangerous when you strike. It can turn on you. So we're gonna do a slightly ovate handle and end it in a little bit of a round handle. So it's gonna go ovate to round, really let you orient that edge properly. It's a lot safer and a lot more pleasing to the eye at the same time.
I hold the torch for a heat source as Matt uses it to heat up the tang and burn through the oak handle.
Now, I have all the parts for Erza's cuirass, ready to be cleaned up, hole sponged, and set up for heat treating. I have the gorget, I have the breastplate, I have the lower lame, and I have the tasseys. I also have the backplate. Armor was and still is the most expensive and laborious piece of the knight's equipment to produce, but it is perhaps the most impressive. In the time where roads are covered with mud, peasants have grime on them and rags, the knight passing through the city would be like an angel descended from the heavens. One has to remember that, as Professor Tobias Capel points out, that the hierarchy of knights extends all the way up into heaven, and thus the knight was supposed to represent the best virtues that the kingdom could offer. So will this armor. It will have crisp edges, perfect fluting, polished. Just like in fairy tale, Erza Scarlet represents the most strong and honorable qualities of her guild.
If you insult the fairy tale guild again in my presence, I swear none of you will live to see tomorrow!
She's arguably the strongest fighter in the guild. She's the core of her team. So too does the armor, the most expensive piece of the knight's equipment, represent the knight's virtues.
After heat treating, he disassembles the armor and begins the repolishing process. This build was a first for Man-at-Arms, where we've shown you not only how to build the sword, but how the matching armor could be made at the same time.
Click here to subscribe, or click here to watch more episodes. Thanks for watching Man-at-Arms Reforged. We need to know what you want the guys to build, so tell us in the comments below what weapons you want to see next.